Okay, good morning everybody, and welcome to the 9th meeting of the Economy, Energy and Fair Work Committee. Can I remind everybody before we start to turn any electronic devices to silent so that we don't get any disturbances. We have apologies today from Dean Lockhart and John Beattie, and therefore can I welcome Maurice Golden and John Mason in their place, and can I invite Maurice Golden to make any declarations of interest?
None.
Thank you. Okay, so if I turn you to the agenda, item 1 is to take a decision on whether to take items 4 and 5 in private. Are we agreed?
Yes.
Thank you. Right, so this morning we're going to continue our inquiry into the energy programme, and we are looking specifically today at electric vehicles. So can I welcome Leslie Deans, the Principal Transport Planner from Clackmannanshire Council, to the committee. I believe this is the first time you've attended to give evidence to a committee.
Yes.
And we're extremely grateful that you've made the journey this morning. You are our lone surviving witness today. So I hope that you will enjoy today. We will ask questions, but first of all, I'd like to invite you, if you wish, to make a statement, perhaps a little bit about your experience and where you think Clackmannanshire Council are at the moment.
Yeah, if you'd like. Leslie Deans, I'm a transportation planner at Clackmannanshire Council. A lot of my job is more to do with local transport planning, but part of my role has now expanded to take on electric vehicle charging, infrastructure development in Clackmannanshire Council. We are obviously a small mainland authority, one of the smallest, population of 50,000. We have about 16 charging points currently in place, with 11 in progress, so 27. So quite small compared to some of the much larger authorities, but we are quite a small area. So I've been involved in that for the past 4 or 5 years maybe, in terms of developing the charging infrastructure. It's been a steep learning curve, I think, is about the best way. I think that's probably all I've really had on that.
Well, perhaps I can start by asking you if you've found any specific challenges around getting charging points installed.
Yeah, it is a challenge. I think at the very beginning, the biggest issue was really the unknown. It was relatively new to all of us in terms of local authorities. Suddenly you were handed a lot of money and said, go and put this in, and you didn't know what you were looking for. I think as it's evolving in terms of the local authorities working with Transport Scotland supporting us where we can, it's gradually getting to the stage where we're getting much more comfortable in terms of how we do that. There are still many challenges to overcome as we go through the process and we come up against more and more problems. It is difficult. I mean, obviously you've got not just the installation of them, you've also got all the procurement issues you've got to deal with. You've got we've been quite fortunate in terms of planning processes. We're generally treating it as permitted development in our local authority. I know in some areas that's more difficult, especially in cities like Edinburgh where you've got conservation areas. That will be more challenging for them as to where you can put that infrastructure. Other issues would be in terms of the power network, and connections and supplies is quite a challenge. What else would I say? I mean, there are lots of different issues in that, in terms of even across the industry, in terms of there's a lack of consistency in terms of car manufacturers don't produce cars that are all the same. You know, there are different plug types that we have. So you might want a specific solution, and then you go to look for that from a supplier of a charge point, and they're like, well, that'll only fit this car and that car. So it's then trying to balance the needs of the many, and you might not get the solution you want. We obviously, again, going into sort of when this really starts to take off and there's a higher demand for them, is going to be an issue in terms of where we can physically fit all these charging points. I mean, you'll have seen them, they're large pieces of infrastructure, and they don't, you know, if you have to turn every parking space in Scotland almost into a charging point, that in itself is a huge ask. So I think there are constantly challenges and issues that are coming up.
Thank you. Right, Andy Whiteman, would you like to?
Yes, thanks very much for coming along today. Could I just ask about how this whole process works? I mean, there's funds being made available by Scottish Government through Transport Scotland. But how do you go about deciding how much infrastructure you're going to put in? To what extent is it your decision, and to what extent are you getting guidance about how to do it strategically along with the rest of Scotland?
That's sort of evolved when we initially were given grant funding, and that in itself was an issue for us because we didn't have the resources to do it. So Transport Scotland originally had come with us with the money and said, you need to put in charging points, and they actually gave us an idea of where they wanted. And at that time we were talking very small numbers. It was maybe, we want you to put in one rapid charger in Alloa, and that was like, okay, that's fine. And it was just finding that. They will sometimes come to us and say, we think maybe you're needing a charger here, but as time has gone on, it's more been left to the local authority to decide where those charging points should go. And it very much is down to the local authority himself. I can't obviously speak for all the authorities in Scotland and Clackmannanshire. It's me that decides where I think they should go. My priority is to try and make sure that every community in our local authority area has access to at least one charging point. We are in the process of drafting a sort of strategy to try and actually plan how we will develop our own network, but also trying to start looking slightly bigger picture in terms of new developments coming in. What standards should we be putting in for private developers? Should they be developing their own charging network, and how that will integrate with the public network? Because that's an issue we have too, is to, you know, the public network that the councils are putting in is all in Charge Place Scotland, but a private operator, a private developer might not use that same network, which then means you've got the issue of not continuity across the network. So, but
use that same network, you mean wouldn't use the Charge Place Scotland network, but they would, yeah.
I would need to, I'm still waiting on clarification from Transport Scotland. As far as I'm aware at the moment, is because we are grant funded through Transport Scotland, we automatically get access to Charge Place Scotland. And as far as I understand it, MD that gets funding through Energy Saving Trust for a public charging point. So if a business apply for their funding through Energy Saving Trust, they can also access Charge Place Scotland. But if we ask a developer, say a large supermarket, to come in and put in a charging point as part of their planning, we're not sure how, if they don't get their funding through, if they decide to fund it themselves, we're not sure if they can actually get put on the Charge Place Scotland network, and that's something we're seeking clarification on.
But private developers, when you're talking about domestic, would be domestic supplies. It wouldn't be public networks. When you're talking about networks, you're talking about institutional developers, offices and businesses, are you?
I mean, yeah, we domestic chargers, we have our own domestic chargers. They're not on Charge Place Scotland. But if you're talking about putting in what's the equivalent of a public network, like I say, a supermarket, they could put in the exact same unit that I would put in, but there's no guarantee that they would put it onto Charge Place Scotland's network.
That's true.
Or whether they can access that, they could use a different one, which means then you've got the issue of lots of different card types.
Yep. No, that is an issue. I mean, where you, sorry, repeat the numbers you've got and the numbers you're going to
in Clackmannanshire.
Yeah.
We have 16 currently in operation and 11 in progress. We don't know what we'll be doing for the coming year because we don't know what our funding will be.
And the 11 is in progress for this financial year?
There are, yes, well, 9, some of them are, it's been a kind of roll on, but it would be 1920, so they should be finished shortly.
How are you deciding where they go?
Well, our priority in Clackmannanshire is to make sure that every community has access to at least one, but we also have taken suggestions from local communities in terms of whether they feel there's a need. So we've had residents, we know where there are residents who have issues accessing at-home charging because they don't have off-street parking. So we're looking at those areas to try and put charging points in the streets, but that in itself brings up its own challenges. And we've also spoke to some of our community councils. Some of them have been very proactive in coming to us and saying we'd like a charger, and it's discussing with them where in their community they think would be a good location. So it's been a variety of methods to try and get to these decisions, but we are very much open to suggestions and working with also other council departments because we are struggling to find sites suitable. We only have so many. I mean, I work in a roads department, so we have control over our roads parking, but we're now trying to speak to housing and education, because obviously they have car parks in schools and obviously in housing land, to try and speak to them, but trying to use some of their sites up and try and find the best places.
And that process of, of procuring a site, as it were, that's down to a negotiation between you and the landowner.
Most of the time it's within the council's control. We have
Right.
tried to negotiate with the NHS to put a charging point on their land. That ended up, the time was just going on, and we've chosen another site to put it on in a community, because we needed one in that community. It's quite a large community. So it's not that we've given up on it, but we've had to put it in the back burner, and we'll try and do that. The issue is obviously when you're dealing with more than one.
And are you charging money for charging?
No.
Do you plan to?
It's something we're considering, but nothing has been taken. We've certainly not got anything in the pipeline at the moment.
So this is costing you money, revenue.
It's costing us quite a bit of money.
How much is it costing you?
I don't have those figures on me. I'd
Right.
need to get them, but I certainly can provide them if required.
That'd be useful.
It would be.
Okay, I've come back from later.
Richard Lyle, please.
Yes, good morning, Leslie. Thanks for coming. You mentioned about basically shops to install. My view has always been, over the last number of years, as we are building houses, that every house should have its own charging point. You know, we put in satellite dishes, we put in telephone lines, we put in broadband. So would you agree with me that we should be considering to say to developers, when you build a house, you've got to put in a charging point?
I think that's a very sensible approach. When it comes to housing with their own driveways, it's much easier. Developers don't need to do much more than put the ability to put a socket into their house wall. It's much more difficult when it comes to flatted developments, and that's something that we are thinking about, how we approach that. But that's a discussion we need to have with our planners, which in itself is a bit of a challenge, because the roads department can only suggest things, we can't make them, and it would be useful to have that in guidance somewhere really that says how that will be managed, because particularly with flatted developments, when a developer passes that on, it becomes the residents, and it's the ongoing maintenance of those. Who takes that? Do we adopt it as a local authority, and how do we pay for that? Or do the residents take it on, and how do you know that they'll do it? So it,
Across a situation where a resident in a flat, upstairs flat, wanted to get the government could give them funding to put in a charging point, but the housing association said, well, that's not your designated parking area, so we're not allowing you. So we have a ridiculous situation of a chap leading a lead right down the stairs and out onto the street, and possibly people could trip over it. And basically, you're right. So would you suggest, and no disrespect, I know you're doing your best within Clackmannan, the best wee council in Scotland. At the end of the day, you've got 27. We have millions of cars out there. You know, one in Alloa isn't going to cut it. So what do we do to encourage more development? Not just by the council, but by developers and by, say, shops and time. In your experience, what would you say we do?
I think it's going to have to come into a sort of a planning sort of requirement almost. I know that some councils have started developing that. I believe South Lanarkshire Council have supplementary planning guidance that actually states how many, what they want put in terms of electric charging. Within Clackmannanshire, we are speaking to our housing association because we felt they were actually an easy one to target, and they've been quite receptive to us installing infrastructure on their land, in terms of we would possibly, I think, lease the land from them. They would own the land, but we would just lease the rights to put in the charging point. We would take ownership, maintenance of that. That's a one-off. Because it's a housing association, it's much easier to do that, because it's almost like a kind of public partnership. There, it's much more difficult when you get private developers to do that. I'd like to see it coming into some sort of planning legislation. I think that's where it has. We've got parking standards and other standards that need to be adhered to. I can't see why the requirement for electric charging infrastructure can't be included in that.
And on a last point, you said that, which I found amazing, that every car manufacturer has a different type of plug-in. You know, that's crazy. You know, shouldn't we have a a standard plug that fits every car. I know that some cars you put your fuel in on one side, and in other cars you put it on the other side. But shouldn't we have a standardised plug-in system for all electric vehicles, whether it's on the left or right-hand side of the car?
I mean, it's one of these things that would be much easier. The issue we had was most charging points accept what's called a Type 2 plug, which means the end that goes in the car, it's a bit like your mobile phone charger. You can have a USB, you can have a micro USB. So the end that goes into the charging point is generally standard, but the cable that goes into the car is different. But that's why you'll see when you come to the rapid chargers, like a petrol filling station, you've got 3 different pumps. It's because the connection is actually attached to the unit and it has to go into the car. That's why we have 3, which is... But the difficulty I found was when I wanted to put in on-street charging, I didn't want people using their own cables, because the cables for a vehicle are 3 metres long, up to. And if they plug their own cable from their car into my unit, that cable is trailing. And when you're talking about on-street, that's then become a tripping hazard, and it's an issue for people with visual and mobility impairments. So the idea I would like is a coiled cable. I've seen it in London, where they have a coiled cable, so it stretches and it attaches to the unit. So obviously, if it was standardised plug, and every car except the same plug, I have one coiled cable in that unit that fits every car. But at the moment, the way it stands, because different cars have different plugs, you would need, like a Rapid, you would need 3 plugs attached to one unit. So it does make it difficult. So I guess it would certainly be much easier for me as a local authority, and I'm assuming the charging manufacturers, if it was just one plug. You don't take, different...
So do you think we should take, just last question, convener, do you think we should take make it a point in the government, a rule that it's got to be standardised?
It would
make
be
it
good,
law?
but I'm not sure how practical that would be, because we're talking about manufacturers internationally. I mean, the same car that is sold in Scotland is also sold in China and Australia.
Sorry,
so
they will just need to conform.
That's a great idea. We should definitely go for that.
It's not for them to decide, it's for us.
I mean, there's no getting around it. I mean, a standard plug would be helpful. How successful we'd be in that.
Thank you very much for your expert advice.
Can I just pick up quickly on something there, and declaring an interest as an electric vehicle driver? One of the issues is time. So the number of charging points you'll need is relative to the time it takes to charge a car. So an average charger can take about 5 to 6 hours. Rapid charger, you can be done and out in 3/4 of an hour. What is your thinking in terms of the types of chargers you're putting in from that point of view? Because obviously you'll need less of them if you have rapid ones.
It's a very difficult one to strike a balance on, and one of the biggest issues we have is electric vehicle owners overstaying perhaps the time. We have issues within our own council car park where the council pool vehicles get put on the rapid charger, and they can sit there for a couple of hours, and obviously that upsets members of the public that can't get in. It's a very difficult one in terms of getting that mix, and it's still fairly early days in terms of the uptake of electric vehicles to really know what balance it is. But we are trying to, when we are thinking about what charges we're putting in, where we generally put a rapid in the areas where there's short stay parking, high turnover of spaces. We will, in the residential areas, they're generally the much more standard slower chargers, so that people they can plug them in overnight. But you're right, as these grow and there's more demand for them, a 7-hour charge is quite significant. But equally, if people are at work and you arrive at 9 o'clock, is your employer going to suddenly let a whole lot of people away at 11 to change their cars, and everybody's got to shuffle around? There are practicalities here as well in how that works, and I'm not sure how we're going to resolve that issue. But we do try and look at the type of spaces they're going in as to whether they are generally long stay, short stay, medium stay parking, and fit the chargers accordingly. Sometimes we'll mix them a bit so that there's a variety of options for people depending how long they're staying. I'm no expert, like I say. It's a steep learning curve for all of us, and I'm not sure we're getting it 100% right. We're doing our best.
Well, combined with human behaviour, it makes it more difficult.
That is definitely the most difficult thing.
Can I go to Gordon MacDonald, please?
I just wanted to ask a couple of questions in continuation of what Andy was asking earlier on. What information do you get in order to help you plan I know you said you want to get one charger per community and you listen to various community groups to see where others should be placed. But what information do you get in relation to the number of electric vehicles in the Clackmannanshire area? The House of Commons report from January of this year suggested in the UK there was 200,000 vehicles, and on a population basis Scotland would have something like 17,000. So do you have any idea of how many actual electric vehicles there are in your council area?
Have that access to that information at all. I have to go on the basis of the people within our community contacting me. Not every electric vehicle owner will, but the ones that are interested will be in touch, and that's how it's easier to plan for those people. But I'm not meeting, by no means do I think I'm meeting the needs of all the electric vehicle owners. And equally, it's not just the current ones, it's the potential electric vehicle owners as well. They need to, you know, if one of the barriers for them is I've nowhere to charge, do they know to come and speak to me at the local authority and ask for advice and assistance on that? I mean, it's certainly, if that is an issue for someone, it's something we can consider and point them. I'm not sure that everybody even knows within the local area where they all are yet.
Yeah. So you don't get any information from DVLA or anything like that?
No, nothing comes to us. It's quite difficult information to find. We do get a lot of figures on how many are owned in Scotland, but it's much more difficult to split them by authority area.
Right.
And equally, just because there's 3% of the vehicles in a local authority area are electric, there are other vehicles coming in from other areas, which again is something that you're trying to figure out how many are actually coming in and actually needing. The demand might be actually higher. So it's, it's information that's certainly lacking.
Right, okay. And in terms of the actual public charging points, you highlighted the number that was in the area. Can you say something about the funding of it? Are they fully funded by these grants that you get? I know you pick up the operating costs, i.e. the electricity charge, but they are fully funded.
They're 100% grant funded through Transport Scotland. I believe some of the funding from that comes from OLEV in terms of central government. There was also additional funding was released last year to cover some maintenance and warranty, because that was one of the things that most local authorities were struggling with, was the ongoing maintenance and warranty. We had already covered some of ours, so we weren't in that situation. But going forward, as we put more and more infrastructure in, those costs are going to go much higher. We've only got enough to cover our current houses.
And roughly, what is the cost of one of these charging points?
You would be about, for a what we call a 7 or a 22 kilowatt, which is a standard or a fast charger, they're in the vicinity of about £9,000 for the unit.
Right.
On top of that, you've then got your electric connection, your DNO costs, which is like Scottish Power and that. They can vary significantly. I've had them as little as 2,000 and as much as 13,000. So and that can be in itself, you're going, is it really worth putting in a new supply at £13,000?
Okay.
A rapid charger, you would be maybe about 40-ish thousand. They're
And
much
again,
more
it with
expensive.
the connection charges on
The
and all
connection
that.
charges, again, they're generally a wee bit more expensive. The biggest issue with the DNO is the length of the connection. So if I want to put in a car park that's right next to a main road, it's going to be much easiver than if that car park's 100 metres away, because they've then got to cable.
Right.
And that's where the costs suddenly spiral
okay.
quite significantly.
And have you been given any indication of the lifespan of these chargers?
We were actually in the process of looking to move 2 chargers because of the car park they were in wasn't suitable. And they're about 9-year-olds. I spoke to the manufacturer and they reckoned a guaranteed lifespan from around about 10. But I mean, by no means are these units breaking down all the time. So I think they'll probably go, but they're saying they would expect about 10 years. I'm not sure if the rapid chargers are similar or not. That was for a standard.
Right, okay.
So.
Battery technology is moving on. When we were up in Orkney, we were told that they were getting roughly about 120 miles. I don't know what your council experience is of your own fleet, but there was an announcement yesterday by GM that by 2023 they're going to be launching 20 new model types that will have a range up to 400 miles. So how do you plan for where you're going to put battery charging points when the range of the batteries is changing?
That's obviously a difficult one. you're right, the battery technology has changed a lot. In my very first experience of electric vehicles within our own council fleet, they are now 62 plates, so they're what, 8-year-old, and we found that the battery range on those is half now. They started off about 80 miles, so they're now down to 40.
Right, okay.
So it's a significant issue. We have some Nissan Leafs that are maybe 4-year-old, and the range on them is maybe, it'll say about 118 miles. We think it's probably a wee bit less than that. We had a couple of members of staff that have suggested on ways to save it, like turn off the heater and turn off the wipers if it's not raining very heavily. It literally is. That member of staff was trapped in a traffic jam coming back from Glasgow and tried to eke every last mile out of that car. So there are very innocent ways. He was very cold and a wee bit damp, but he got the car home. But the new Nissan Leaf has a range of about 200 miles, so you see it quite quickly. And in terms of our very first vehicle was 80, now they're up to over 120, now they're up to 200. So just in those 3 to 4 years, I believe the Teslas already have quite significant range. Yeah, they're much better, and Tesla are obviously a different beast almost in the car manufacturing, because they're talking about superchargers that are going to take massive, they're going to be quick to charge, and they're going to give you that. So that will change perhaps even the infrastructure we need to put in. Tesla have their own charging points. I believe that Stirling Council have specific Tesla chargers, which is fine if you've got a Tesla. So we're kind of always playing catch up to what the industry are doing. If people are driving 400 miles on a charge, then I think there's going to be much more need for the rapid charging, because they're going to want to, they're going to be going further distances and want a quick charge and do it. And I think everybody wants that. I think everybody wants a pull up and go. They want the petrol station experience. So there are, like I say, there's been rumours in the industry about how the current petrochemical industry is going to get involved. Are they going to turn petrol filling stations perhaps into big charging? There's been talk of battery swaps in vehicles. We really don't know is the answer, I suppose.
And just my final question is, how closely, you said at the beginning that you got some guidance from Transport Scotland about where to place some of these chargers at the beginning. How closely do you work with Transport Scotland, and what guidance do you get from Transport Scotland?
We work very closely with Transport Scotland. They've been very good in supporting all the local authorities in Scotland. They hold workshops once a year generally to give us updates on where they are with things and what funding's coming forward. They also provide technical guidance, which is very... I am not an electrical engineer to trade, so it's very specific in terms of what wattage and voltage and amps should be in these units. So in many ways we take that guidance and pass it back out. When we prepare briefs for our procurement exercise, we'll just basically take that and say you need to meet these standards, and that makes it much easier for me, because then I know I'm meeting the requirements for Transport Scotland one. So they've obviously done a lot of that hard work for us. But in terms of the planning of where the things go, they're generally fairly flexible, and they will let the local authorities make those decisions, which is good for us because we obviously know the local areas much better. But they also have a strategic role that if they do feel that there is an area where, particularly when you look at the rapid charging network, they want to make sure there's so many miles between these, so they might come to me and go, we're missing one here. We feel that there's one in your neighbouring authorities here and here, but we need one in the middle. So they will ask for that as well.
Okay.
But I think that's actually starting to come. That's going to be more for some of the bigger strategic routes, like your trunk road network. Perhaps the A9 is a perfect example where they might come into a council and say we need one in this town.
Okay, thanks very much.
Helps.
Really helpful.
Can I go to John Mason, please?
Thanks, convener. I think for me it was around building on what's been said already. There was mention of the costs, and I think you said you're not charging. And from the briefing we've had, the councils are just all completely different. Some have always charged. I think Murray's always charged. Dundee's charging for non-residents but free for residents. There's this whole mixture. It'd be simpler, but do you think it would be a good idea if we had just a kind of national scheme and everything was the same?
That was what most local authorities were looking for. I think Transport Scotland seemed to look that that was the line they were going to go down, and then they decided that no, they weren't going to do that. They felt I'm not sure the exact reasoning, but I think it was something to do with they felt it might be better to let the local authorities make those decisions, to give them that decision-making power. As a local authority, though, it's difficult. I think I would, personally, as a local authority, I'd prefer that was sort of standardised, because it means then you've not got people, you're not competing with a neighbouring authority. Clackmannanshire so small, we're so close to Stirling and Dunfermline and Falkirk and some other towns that if our charging was way too high, it would put demand on their units to obviously people from our area would go there to charge, or if we were too cheap then we would have demand. So it makes it a difficult one to know how that would work. We're certainly in discussions with our neighbouring authorities what charging they are setting, and when and if and when Clackmannanshire goes down that line, we will be trying to align it with our neighbouring authorities anyway. So that might actually make it standardised in a
Yes.
roundabout way.
And easier for the drivers to know what was
Yeah.
happening. I mean, it's been suggested, going back to the issue of people overstaying their welcome kind of thing, that and maybe you haven't got this far, but then if there was an extra charge for people, an extra cost for people, if they overstayed, that would be a way of managing that demand. Is that something you've looked at all?
It's something we're considering. At the moment in Clackmannanshire, we don't have any parking charges in the area, and we don't have any decriminalised parking, so enforcement's obviously an issue for us. But that's another thing that the council is looking at, is kind of going through the council at the moment as to what charges will go in place at some point and how we would deal with the electric charging points. Do we charge them to charge? If they're charging, is it fair to charge them for parking because they might just be actually charging and just want to go? So these decisions are still being looked at and decided how best to do it. But yes, it is a way perhaps to control the overstaying. We have Transport Scotland, again, going back to guidance, have provided a kind of, I'm not sure if it's Transport Scotland or Energy Saving Trust, but between the two there is definitely a link. They've provided us with etiquette for electric vehicle drivers in terms of how long they stay, and we try to promote that where we can, but you're at the mercy of people actually reading that and actually following it. But it is certainly something we could look at as to whether that would manage it.
The other thing I wanted to ask about was about when the infrastructure's broken, about getting it fixed, because frankly, I have recently bought a petrol car again because I could maybe get a map of the charging points, but the last thing I want to do is turn up at a charging point that's not working. Have you had a problem with that? Because there's some suggestion that some of them are not being repaired very quickly.
Yes, we had to take one rapid charger in the area. We've now got 3 in operation and another one planned, and a rapid charger repeatedly broke down, and we didn't have a maintenance agreement with our manufacturer. That took a bit of negotiating. It's in place now, and it's just in the process of getting fixed. But that unit had to be taken off the map. We actually had to ask ChargeSpace Scotland to take it off and put a sign on it and just said it was out of order because it literally got fixed and it tripped, and we didn't have anything in place. All our other units are with another manufacturer. They're generally fairly good at getting them reported, but we do have 2 at the moment that have been out since January and then they're waiting in parts. So that's an issue. They're meant to be reported and dealt with either on a 24 or 48 hour process, priority-based process. But that doesn't always work. It depends what the fault is and how quickly it is. If it's lost communications, it's much easier to get it back up and running. Sometimes it's a case of, we're quite a small authority, so it's easy for us that if something's gone wrong, sometimes we'll just go out, switch the plug off, switch it back on, just power it down, power it up. It's a bit like what you do, and that's fine. That's much more difficult for large council areas, like, for example, the Highland Council. That's a massive area. I mean, they can't just drive out to every charging point that's out and switch the plug off because they're talking huge distances.
Your impression is from colleagues that they are also having these problems with maintenance?
Yes, but there are. I mean, Transport Scotland have put in place now with ChargePlace Scotland, where we now get access to, they report to the council now and tell us when a unit's out, so we get a ticket fault sent through, which makes it a wee bit easier because you can't keep on top of your network and go out and check everything yourself on a daily basis, so you're relying on people reporting them, members of the public, getting that into the system and then telling us, and then we have to try and keep an eye on it and chase them up, but it's not always easy. And sometimes units are out of order and they haven't been reported, and then people come along and then they moan and say, well, the unit wasn't working. I'm like, well, nobody's told me, so it's difficult, and it's getting that process communicated.
Thanks so much. Thanks.
Okay, it might be worth noting that at a Tesla supercharger, you get 5 minutes from the end of your charge to remove your car, and if you don't do so, a significant charge is then added to your account. So it certainly improves etiquette, shall we say, in removing it. Jackie Bailey, has your question been asked and answered, has it?
Several of them have, thank you, Convener.
Right. Alison Harris.
Mine really have as well, but just bringing you back to the point, you said 2 of these charges are waiting in parts. Is that 2 of the 16 that you have in place?
One of them is one plug. The other plug is, so each charger has 2 plugs. So one of them is waiting on one, the other one, the charger unit is completely down. But yes, it's out of that 16.
So it's out of it, right? Okay, that's lovely. Thank you. Everything else has been asked.
Is that it? Maurice Golden?
Thanks, convener. I'm just wondering, you've kind of outlined lots of the capital costs of putting this in place, and my understanding from your evidence would be that that has largely been met through funding. In terms of the revenue costs, can you give us an idea of the costs of service and maintenance of these charging points, and if there's any funding coming into the council to cover that at all?
We were given, I think it was £22,000 last year from Transport Scotland to get more warranty and maintenance agreements in place for all our charging points that we had already in operation that were out of warranty, and that was to cover them up to December 2023, I believe. We have spent about half of that, so we think we'll probably not require the full amount. We don't, the electricity charges are basically coming out of the council's funds. So all there's also standing charges on some of our rapid units, which is a kind of fixed fee that we get sent through on top, which makes them more expensive. That all comes out of the council's budgets. It currently comes out of our facilities budget, but those costs are starting to really ramp up now as more and more people are using them, and that's something that I think that's why now councils are starting to look at how they recoup those costs. It used to be, up until last year, that all charging points that were funded through Transport Scotland had to be provided free of charge. That was then taken out last year, so that's been good for a lot of authorities. Although I say, you're right, Murray Council have always put in a charge. And our new units that are going in, we always ask for a 4-year maintenance and warranty to be built in, so that covers them all for the first 4 years. But equally, as they all start to come out of warranty at the same time, and suddenly you've got twice as many, then that's going to be something that as authority, when we factor how much we might charge in terms of a tariff for using the units, we'll need to factor in not just the cost of the electricity, but also maintenance and warranty, and probably ultimately replacement of the units at some point in the future, because we will need to start getting that money into bank, because some of these units will just get to the stage where they're too expensive to repair and it's cheaper to replace. So there's a lot really to be thought about in terms of how we structure that tariff.
And just more generally, in terms of what kind of key stakeholders help provide you with advice, you mentioned Transport Scotland, you mentioned Energy Savings Trust. Those are the two kind of main bodies that kind of assist you when you're doing procurements or where to locate charging and things.
Yeah, I mean, Energy Saving Trust, we don't really have a huge amount of direct dealing with. They're more for, we point private developers and that are interested to them. We work a lot with, obviously, Transport Scotland. We've also found that actually some of the charge point manufacturers, in terms of the companies that are providing the installation, they've actually been incredibly good at helping us in terms of what we need and what they suggest and how we might save on money, etc. They're actually been very good, or certainly my experience of the charging manufacturers we use have been like that, because we were looking at putting in 2 22s and a 7, and they actually went, you might be better with 3 7s, because suddenly you're going to have these electricity charges and you're going to have to put in a great big unit and it's going to put your price up. So they are quite good at giving that kind of advice.
And can you talk us through the grid connection process, how that goes about, how you found it?
It's been a challenge. It depends. We've used 2 suppliers in the past. One of them took the whole process from me and dealt with it all from start to finish. Our preferred supplier that we use for the majority of our installations will do the liaison with the DNO, or in our case it's Scottish Power. They'll do the liaison, but when it comes to payment, it has to come through the council, so we have to place the order with Scottish Power, and that can sometimes make it a bit confusing, because then the wrong people are on. You're getting conjured about technical stuff and you're like, I don't know what they're talking about. You have to keep, there's a wee bit of duplication of work there as well, but in the main it's been relatively okay. I wouldn't say it's perfectly straightforward. It'd be much easier if the suppliers were just taking that completely on and doing that. But then I don't know if I'm getting value for money by doing it that way. At least this way I'm seeing what the prices are coming in for the power supply, and I can then make a decision as to whether actually that site should go ahead, because if you're talking about £13,000 to put in a power supply, it might be better looking for another location, so it's maybe not so bad. But once that does go ahead and the supplier then deals with the electricity provider and they'll liaise with them in terms of getting everything going forward. But it's not been perfect. We have had recently where we've looked at charging points that have gone in, and again, it's lack of resources within the council. We've had to ask for someone to be able to go out and do site supervision because things have gone in slightly wrong places, and we've had an issue with, obviously I've talked about already, with street furniture and blocking for, obviously for people with disabilities. That's a concern for me, where we've had electric charging, the pillars that the power's coming into, and it's kind of right next to the charging point, and it's making the footway too narrow. So we've had a lot of issues with that. I mean, that's something that we as an authority have been trying to be very careful about, is making sure that we are compliant for equalities. But I'm not convinced that that message has been shared widely in the other authorities. So yeah, it's just trying to, it's definitely evolving, it's getting better. It could be a wee bit more streamlined, perhaps.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much, Convener. Thanks for coming, Leslie. Yeah, I was wondering about the issue about all of us, your council included, putting in the same number of charging points as you have petrol filling station points, and we're presumably trying to make a transition towards that over time, over the next 10, 12 years or so. Do you think we're doing enough, all of us collectively? What do you see the council's role is in doing that, and in affecting public opinion to make them and encourage them to make the transition to EV? Because the sales are still pretty low, I think, relatively to petrol and diesel, aren't they? They're very. Do the councils have a role in that? Do you expect the governments to kind of promotional schemes to make the transition faster? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I think at the beginning, Transport Scotland, that's why they wanted them all to be free, and, you know, local authorities kind of went with that and said, yeah, that's fine, okay, we'll do that. We certainly, we have a dedicated web page for electric vehicles, and I believe that most Scottish local authorities have some sort of web link or information out there, and we try and point people in the direction of things like the Energy Savings Trust, who are good at providing advice to sort of private vehicle owners in terms of getting them out there, like petrol and diesel cars and into electric. But I think there's no getting around it. People are still anxious about range and charging and cost. Yes, we hear about the price of a car being twice what a petrol or diesel will be, and it's difficult as a local authority to promote that, because it's really the car manufacturers you would think would be the ones that really want to promote that. But we all have a role to play in it, I suppose. How directly or indirectly that may be.
And I remember at a previous committee meeting we were talking about the garage forecourt and what it might evolve into. You kind of mentioned it earlier as well, and whether there's a role for the oil companies to play a part here, because in the rural communities you've got loads of little rural villages. I'm just looking at Clipmanshire there. The garage forecourt is much more than just a place to go and get petrol or diesel. It's a shop and it's got services and so on. Is there any discussion that you know of with the oil companies to try and see what their thinking is here, and whether and how they might develop their forecourts to continue to provide these services to rural communities and put in electric charging points perhaps as well?
There's definitely been discussions, who with and where these discussions are happening, but there's definitely the rumours are going about. There's been various little snippets and articles about where these could be. I mean, that's maybe not specific to Scotland, perhaps the UK as a whole. I'm not really sure. We had one petrol filling station in our area on the road between Clipmanshire and Stirling, who had suggested they might like to put a rapid charge, and they'd put in a planning application. However, as far as I'm aware, I'm not sure they've actually ever gone forward and done that. I suppose at the moment they'll be going, where's the money in this? Because if I'm offering it for free, they're not going to be too keen to put in something that they're not going to make any money off of, that's just sitting there lying idle. At the end of the day, that's what they're in the business for. Transport Scotland have mentioned that there may be the potential at some point to transfer ownership of the publicly owned charging points into the private sector, but they've kind of left that up to local authorities to go and make those you know, it's been almost implied that if you want to pass on your electric charging network to a private operator to go and make money out of that, then that may be something we would consider, but nothing concrete that way. It's been alluded to, I think, more than anything, so it's difficult to know whether there is someone. And certainly I think it's the same as with petrol stations. There'll be areas that are more lucrative than others, and to a private business, that's ultimately they're in it to make money. So in areas where there's lots of electric vehicles and high turnover, then that's obviously going to be a much more attractive opportunity for them than perhaps a rural community where there's only maybe 1 or 2 vehicles coming in a week at the moment. Obviously, as this develops, and I mean, we are talking about quite a short time scale for everyone to switch to electric, that demand will suddenly surge. So it could be in the future something that petrol stations will naturally they'll have to evolve in some way to meet the demands of what the vehicle drivers want. You see that obviously with motorway service areas. You can see them coming in these kind of areas where, you know, and next to the petrol filling station, you'll also find there's electric charging coming in.
Okay. I don't think anybody's asked. I want to ask you about breakdowns. I think you mentioned somebody that you knew that almost ran out of power and so on. Inevitably, there's going to be breakdowns when you're driving along the motorway or whatever. Is there a service that can rapidly come along and give a car a quick boost to get them off the motorway? I don't know enough about the technology in that respect. Does it need to sit there for 3 hours to get any kind of kick, or can these cars be kick-started for a brief period to get them off the motorway to a charging point? How does that work?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure, but I understand some of the breakdown services like the EA and the REC have mobile chargers that might get enough to get them to the next charging station. How efficient, how much charge they take, how long they take, I have no idea. Certainly the advice we were given is don't run out. When you take the car, make sure it's charged, make sure there's enough in it. I think there's a difficult, and again, don't quote me on this, but I believe that there's some issue that you're not meant to tow electric vehicles. I think they need to put on the back of a truck or something. Yes, that's true. Yeah, that's what we basically, I mean, certainly, as not just the person that puts in the electric infrastructure, we also have electric pool cars in our fleet, and that's the advice I give all our drivers. Don't run out of fuel. Don't run out of power. Just make sure they're going to get back.
And lastly, on where the EV charging points are, you can see them in Google Maps and stuff like that. It's just to ask if Clockmannon and others are making sure that all their EV points are on all these map apps that we have on our mobile phones, so that if you are driving along, you can find out where your nearest EV point is and almost instantly.
They're all on, all our active ones that are actually commissioned and up and running are on the Charge Place Scotland network, and that's where we point everybody to. We do have our own internal mapping, although it's not currently up and running, but previously it did have all our own ones mapped, but it's not live. So the only one that's really live that's useful to anybody as a driver is the Charge Place Scotland one, because if any faults are reported, they immediately should be putting that on and saying either, you know, this unit's out or only half of it's working, and it also tells you if there's a vehicle on charge. Doesn't tell you if somebody's parked in the space, unfortunately, and not plugged in, but it does tell you if there are another electric vehicles in there.
That's helpful.
So we always use that.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you.
Okay. Andy Whiteman, you want to come back in?
A few follow-up questions. Are you, what kind of regulations are you considering putting in place to make sure that people are not abusing charging places, which, as I understand, are for charging, not for parking? You have regulation making powers.
Yes, we can put in a traffic regulation order. Our current town centres car parking TRO does have electric parking included in it, but it doesn't have all of the car parks that currently have electric charging in it. So it's only really got the roads car parks. So what the plan is, as this year's installs get finalised, we'll probably look to review that and get all the car parks that aren't actually technically roads ones, like I said, our housing ones or our education ones, and actually get them included in that. The biggest difficulty we have as an authority, there are only, I think, 4 in Scotland that don't have decriminalised parking powers. We have no enforcement. So we're in a unique situation that although we have the regulation in place to actually enforce it, we don't actually have anybody to do that enforcement for us. That may change as we obviously go forward and look at parking charges. Other councils do have, for example, Edinburgh City Council have parking wardens and can do that. Whether their traffic regulation order covers that, I don't know. I would imagine most authorities
and
will be putting that in.
Gordon MacDonald mentioned batteries, which will change dramatically over the next decade or so. But nevertheless, I mean, is the focus of your efforts on providing residents with a place that they can charge up once a week or whatever? Because I mean, the average journey, I think, by car in Scotland is 10, 12 miles a day. So you don't need to charge up every day. And obviously, if you're travelling a distance, there's plenty of facilities en route. So is that the focus of your efforts to provide residents?
We are trying to make sure that every community has access to a charging point, mostly for those that can't put one in on their own property. Yep. But equally, we're trying to provide charging at destinations. So, for example, our council office, we've got charging points there. We're putting charging points into schools. We've got one school where a charging point is a new development of a school, so we're trying to get that dropped in as part of so that visitors and staff also have access. It's a slow process, but we're trying to get them where people need them when they arrive at their destination, so that if they're coming in to shop at a supermarket, you know, they would hopefully have it. Obviously, we can't put them on private land, but we're trying to encourage other large developers to think about putting in their own. Certainly our charging point's right next to a large superstore, so our charging point's heavily used by those customers. And like I say, they're not very happy if they can't get into it, so there's definitely demand for them in these types of developments. So it's trying to get a mixture of overnight residential charging and daytime workplace, sort of day-to-day leisure activities as well.
We had a meeting with electrical vehicle users in Stirling as a committee. We had about 20 or 30 people there. And we also talked to people in Orkney, and there was a persistent complaint about the back office operation, about the difficulties of communicating with Charge Your Car Limited, which operates the Charge Praise Scotland network, which, as I understand it, is now owned by BP Chargemaster. I mean, what's your experience of that, or do you not really have an experience because that's the driver's side of the thing? Because I mean, there's a liability issue here because you're being asked, you're being given funding to put these things in, you're putting them in, you own them, but you have no control over who then operates that. Is that an issue?
It can be. Certainly in the beginning, the Charge Place Scotland communications were very poor. They are slowly improving, but they're still not great. We get if a fault's reported to us, generally we get a generic email sent to us to say this charging point number is out of action. What we don't then get is a follow-up to say it's back in operation or it's waiting parts. That then relies on me going in and checking to see what status that's at and whether the fault's been reported. And when you're already doing another day job as well, in that time it's sometimes things that you drop the ball on, and then you have people, member of the public, complaining and saying that charging point's not been working for a month, and you're like, why is it not working? So you're chasing them, but we're not necessarily getting that.
You don't have a direct relationship with them legally?
No, it's all through Transport Scotland put the contract out for
so
that.
So on the one hand, you've got a government agency providing funding and contracting the operation of a network, but a network which is in fragmented ownership in 32 local authorities. It doesn't seem to me that long term, when the demands on this network increase, that's a particularly good business model.
Yeah, it's a difficult one.
Particularly when you start charging, because I mean, I'm looking at the business case for Edinburgh, which is kind of way behind the curve in all of this, but it's slowly catching up, I think. And they're clear that they're going to charge from day one. Charging from day one, if I live in Clickmannon, if I live in Edinburgh, which I do, and I'm paying Edinburgh Council for the electricity, I have a contractual relationship with them. They're not going to be, I don't think, in the medium term, happy that the operation of this, they have no control over. I know no other business model that would work like that, where I pay the council, but the council has no control over the service I receive.
Yeah, it's Transport Scotland that control that contract, and if we have any issues, and we have had issues, we've had to escalate it through Transport Scotland to get that to a resolution. And I know that I think Transport Scotland now have meetings with Charge Place Scotland or BP Chargemaster in terms of their contract and the things that are coming out through the local authorities in terms of those exact things, in terms of reporting and making sure faults are getting fixed. it's definitely better than it was, but it's not completely perfect because, like I say, things are faulty and we're not getting told that they're still faulty or what's happening and, you know, where we are in the process, which is, yes, and I don't really have power to go and demand they sort that. Transport Scotland, we need to do that. But we do have a good relationship with them, so that's one avenue for it.
Good, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else with any further questions? No? Well, can I thank you ever so much, Ms Deans, for coming. It was very, very good of you to actually turn up. I think it's been a very useful session. I hope everybody's got lots. And can I just ask you if there's anything you want to add before you leave?
The only other thing that I had kind of thought about that is something that needs to be considered in terms of going forward with this is I think I touched on it briefly, the equalities in terms of people that have disabilities accessing charging points themselves. There are physical restrictions in that. We've tried to put in place what we think's DDA compliant charging infrastructure, but I'm not convinced we're actually ticking all the boxes. I don't think they're perfect. They're not too bad. And it would be useful, I think at some point, again, it comes back to what was talked about in terms of guidance and coming out, that, you know, standards, you talked about parking standards for new developments, but equally how we provide for people with disabilities, because equally in, you know, in 10, 12 years, we have a huge population that hold a blue badge, and they are also going to need access to these chargers and making sure that they are not forgotten about. And I know certainly speaking to other authorities, some of them don't even consider it. So it's something that might be something you want to consider.
Presumably, I mean, obviously at the moment they're driving combustion engines and have to get petrol and diesel in the same way. So there must be a comparative there, because it's the same basic movement of taking a pump and connecting it to your car. So perhaps it would be good to look at what's been done to ensure access to petrol and diesel supplies and
I think
how,
a lot of
how
them,
that works.
yeah.
Yeah.
Because on a petrol filling station, I think they can sound their horn and someone from the petrol station can come out and refill their car. You can't do that if you've got a charger at the side of a road.
Well, it's interesting because certainly a lot of petrol stations I go to maybe only have one person
Yeah.
on. So I've actually never seen it happen. I don't know whether anybody else has, but that's certainly something.
It's
You're
something
right.
else.
We need to give
It's something else
consideration
that
to.
needs to be considered,
Yeah,
and
definitely.
it's. Other than that, I think that was the only thing I'd add.
In that case, thank you ever so much, and we wish you a safe journey back to Blackmannishire. And perhaps next time I drive through, I'll have to test out your charging points. Okay, thank you. The committee will move into private session now, so we'll take a short break for 5 minutes.